When Betty Morgan slipped a Hell's Angel a free plate of eggs, her manager fired her on the spot. 3 weeks later, 2,000 motorcycles rolled into town and made her the owner of the entire building. Subscribe to see how kindness became the most powerful weapon in a small Pennsylvania town. The smell hit first. Burnt coffee, fryer grease going rancid, and that particular staleness that clings to vinyl booths worn thin by decades of bodies sliding in and out. Route 9 Diner sat along a stretch of Pennsylvania highway where farmland gave way to forest, where trucks idled through the night, and the fluorescent lights never quite reached the corners. It was 6:47 on a Tuesday morning in late October, and the frost had started forming on the windows in patterns that looked like fingers reaching inward. Betty Morgan moved between tables with the rhythm of someone who had walked the same path for 34 years. Her hands wrapped around the coffee pot, knuckles swollen with arthritis that she never mentioned, wedding ring loose on a finger that had grown thinner over time. She was 61. Her husband had been gone 8 years. The ring stayed on. The motorcycle pulled into the parking lot with a sound that cut through the morning quiet. A single bike, older model, patches on the rider's jacket worn but clean. He sat for a moment before dismounting, and Betty watched through the window as he checked his pockets, pulled out a handful of crumpled bills, counted them twice. He came inside, took the corner booth, didn't look at the menu. Betty approached with the coffee pot already in hand. Up close, she could see the details. The patches said things she didn't fully understand, but his face said things she did. Exhaustion, hunger that went deeper than missing a meal. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." His voice was quiet, respectful. "And what can I get for $8? She glanced at the bills on the table. 6 singles, a 5, some quarters. Closer to $7.50. "Breakfast specials $12.50, she said. Then, without hesitation, without looking toward the kitchen, she wrote on her pad, "But the coffee's on the house today, hun, and I think we can work something out." She brought him the full plate. Eggs, hash browns, toast, 2 strips of bacon. Refilled his coffee twice. He ate slowly, like someone trying to make it last. And when he finished, he stacked his plates the way people do when they've worked in restaurants themselves. That was when Derek Vaughn came out of the back office. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Betty turned. Derek was 42, owned the franchise, wore his authority like a coat that didn't quite fit. He was staring at the biker, then at Betty, then at the register. "He's a customer," Betty said calmly. "He's short." Derek moved closer, voice rising. "I saw you. You gave him the special. Did he pay $12.50? The diner had gone quiet. 2 truck drivers at the counter, an older couple in the far booth, all watching now. "I covered it," Betty said. "You covered it." Derek's face was reddening. "Out of what? Your tips? That's not how this works, Betty. That's theft." "It's kindness. It's against policy." He turned to the biker. "You need to leave, now, before I call the police." The biker stood slowly, hands visible. "Ma'am, I can come back with the rest." "Don't bother," Derek snapped. He grabbed Betty's apron, yanked it. "You know what? You're done. 34 years and you still don't understand basic business. Get out." Betty stood very still. The coffee pot was still in her hand. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator units and the distant rumble of a truck passing on the highway. "You're firing me," she said. Not a question. "I'm firing you. Clean out your locker. I want you gone in 10 minutes. She set the coffee pot down on the counter. Her name tag came off with a small metallic click that seemed louder than it should have been. She placed it next to the register. The biker stepped forward. "Sir, this is my fault. She was just... I don't care what she was doing. Both of you. Out." Betty walked to the back. Her locker held a spare pair of shoes, a cardigan, a photo of her son. She took them without looking at anyone. When she came back through, Derek was already serving another table, acting as if nothing had happened. Outside, the October air bit at her skin. Her Honda Civic was parked at the far end of the lot, paint faded, a crack in the windshield she kept meaning to fix. She was halfway there when she heard boots on gravel. The biker kept a respectful distance. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause." "You didn't do anything, sweetheart." Her voice was stern, firm. But her hands were shaking now. Some people forgot what decent looks like. That's not on you. Is there anything I can do? She looked at him, really looked, saw someone who'd been where she was, on the edge, counting coins, needing help, and hating to ask for it. You take care of yourself, she said. That's enough. She got in her car, started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot for the last time, and she didn't look back at the diner in her mirror, because if she did, she thought she might pull over and break down, and she'd promised herself a long time ago that she wouldn't do that where people could see. The biker stood in the parking lot, watching her taillights disappear. Then he pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts, found a name. The call connected. "Hawk," he said, "it's Flint. We got a situation." Pause. "Remember what you always say about good people?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yeah, that's the one. Good people always circle back." 16 years earlier, the same diner looked different. The booths were newer then, the paint less faded, but the smell was the same. Coffee and grease, and the particular silence that came after midnight when the highway emptied and the only sound was rain hammering the roof. It was summer, 2007, 11 at night. Betty was younger then, 45, her hands not yet twisted by arthritis, but already she moved with that economy of motion that came from too many double shifts. The diner was supposed to close at 10, but the owner back then didn't care, as long as someone was there to serve the stragglers. The 3 motorcycles pulled in through the downpour, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. Betty was wiping down tables, getting ready to flip the sign, when they came through the door. Leather jackets soaked through, boots tracking water across the tile. The patches on their backs said Iron Covenant MC, Pennsylvania chapter. The one in front was young, 29, though he looked older in the way people do when life's gotten to them early. His hands were shaking as he slid into the booth, and it wasn't from the cold. "Just coffee," he said, "whatever you got." Betty brought 3 cups, didn't ask questions. The 2 men with him were quieter, watchful. One had a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw. The other kept glancing at the door like he expected someone to follow them in. She refilled the coffee once, twice. By the 3rd time, the young one in front, the one whose patch said Hawk, was gripping the cup so hard his knuckles had gone white. "You okay, hun?" Betty asked. That was all it took. He looked up at her, and something broke. "I got a daughter," he said, voice rough, like he'd been swallowing glass. "She's 11 months old. I've never held her, not once." Betty set the coffee pot down, pulled out the chair across from him, sat. "Her mom won't let me see her, says I'm dangerous, says the club makes me unfit." He laughed, bitter. "She's right. I just got out, 18 months for assault. Some guy at a bar said the wrong thing, and I put him through a table." The man with the scar, Flint, put a hand on Hawk's shoulder, said nothing. "I rode 200 miles to her apartment, sat outside for an hour, couldn't even get out of the bike. What am I supposed to say? That I'm different now? I'm not. I'm still the same guy who couldn't control his temper, still wearing the same patches." Betty listened, didn't interrupt, let the silence sit until he was ready to continue. "My old man left when I was 4. I don't even remember his face. I swore I'd never do that to my kid, and here I am, doing exactly that, because her mom's right. I am dangerous." Betty reached into her apron pocket, pulled out her wallet. Inside was a photo, creased and faded, a man in desert camouflage, dress uniform, medals on his chest. "My husband," she said. "He came back from Desert Storm a different man. Couldn't sleep, couldn't be in crowds. It took him 3 years before he could hold our son without shaking. You know what saved him?" Hawk looked at the photo, then at her. People who didn't give up on him, his brother, his squad leader, me. We just kept showing up, kept telling him he was more than the worst thing he'd done. She slid the photo back into her wallet. "You can't change what you were, but you get to choose what you become. That baby doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs to see you try. Hawk stared at his coffee. Her mom won't even open the door. Betty stood. Where does she live? 20 minutes later, Betty was in her car with Hawk in the passenger seat, following his directions through empty streets to an apartment complex on the east side of town. His two brothers followed on their bikes, headlights reflecting off wet pavement. The apartment was on the second floor, lights off. Hawk stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long time before he climbed them. Betty stayed in the car, watched as he knocked, waited, knocked again. A light came on. The door opened a crack, chain still on. A woman's voice, sharp with fear and anger. Hawk talked. She shook her head. He kept talking. The door stayed cracked. Then the woman looked past him, saw Betty sitting in the car under the parking lot light. An older woman, alone, patient, not threatening, just there. Something shifted. The chain came off. The door opened wider. Hawk stepped inside. Betty waited 2 hours. Flint and the other brother, Reaper, stood by their bikes, smoking, not talking. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like ozone and wet concrete. When Hawk came out, he was crying, carrying something wrapped in a blanket. His daughter, 11 months old, asleep against his chest. He stood at the top of the stairs, and for a moment he just held her. Then he looked down at Betty, and his face said everything words couldn't. In the parking lot, he handed the baby back through the doorway. The mother, Sarah, stood there watching, wary but less afraid. "I can come back?" Hawk asked. "Supervised, once a week, we'll see." It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Hawk sat in Betty's car for a long time afterward, not speaking. Finally he said, "Why? Why what? Why would you do that? You don't know me." Betty put the car in gear, started driving back toward the diner. "I know enough," she said. "I know you showed up. That's more than a lot of people do." At the diner, before he got back on his bike, Hawk pulled a napkin from the dispenser, borrowed a pen from Betty, wrote something down, and handed it to her. It said, "Good people always circle back." "My mom used to say that," he said, "before she died. I haven't thought about it in years." Betty folded the napkin, put it in her apron pocket. 16 years later, Hawk stood in his garage. He was 45 now, gray in his beard. His daughter Emma was 16, an honors student, played violin, called him every Sunday. The napkin was still in a plastic sleeve, thumbtacked to the wall above his workbench. His phone rang, Flint's name on the screen. "Betty Morgan," Flint said when Hawk answered. "You remember her?" Hawk looked at the napkin. At the photo next to it, Emma at her last recital. "Yeah," he said, "I remember. She got fired today for doing the same thing she did for you." Silence. "I need to make some calls," Hawk said. The clubhouse smelled like motor oil and old leather. A narrow room with a long table down the center, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, shelves lined with parts and tools and photographs of rides that went back decades. 8 o'clock on Tuesday night, and 14 members of the Iron Covenant sat waiting. Hawk stood at the head of the table. He called church, which meant this was official. No one spoke until he was ready. He connected his phone to the projector. The image that appeared on the wall was grainy, shot through a window, but clear enough. Betty Morgan standing in the diner, coffee pot in hand. Derek Vaughn shouting, face red. Betty's name tag on the counter. 16 years ago, Hawk said, this woman drove me to my daughter's apartment at midnight, sat in a parking lot for 2 hours in the rain, didn't ask for anything, didn't want recognition. She just believed people deserve a second chance. He let that sit. Today, her manager fired her for giving away a $12 breakfast. Flint was the one she helped. Same thing she did for me. Flint stood. Guy's name is Derek Vaughn, owns 3 franchise locations across the county. I looked him up. He's done this before. Fired a single mother last year for feeding a homeless kid from the day-old pastries. Reaper leaned forward. He was 52 now, vice president of the chapter, hands scarred from years of mechanical work and bar fights he'd stopped having a decade ago. "What are we talking?" he asked. "Protest? We go in, fill the place, make it uncomfortable for him?" "Bigger," Hawk said. "Betty's 61. No pension, no savings. I want her to never worry about money again." The room went quiet. A younger member, Stitch, former Army medic with a dishonorable discharge he never explained, spoke up. "There's a model for this. Charity rides, pledges per mile. We've done it before." "Not charity," Hawk said. "Business. We buy the building, make her the owner." Someone whistled low. Another member shook his head. "That building's worth, what, 300 grand? That was Ledger, the club treasurer. 48 years old, former accountant who'd done 18 months for embezzlement. He kept the books now, clean and precise, like penance. "We've got maybe 18,000 in club funds. Even if we leverage—" "We call the network," Hawk interrupted. "Every chapter we're allied with, every independent club that's ridden with us. Last year, we did that hospital run. 600 bikes showed up. This is the same thing. We're asking for help." Preacher cleared his throat. He was 67, Vietnam vet, the club chaplain, though no one could remember him ever reading from a Bible. "Kid's right. We make the ask, see who answers." Hawk looked around the table. "I'm not ordering this. Anyone who can't contribute, no judgment. But I'm putting in everything I've got." One by one, they pledged. Flint, $500. Reaper, $1,200. Stitch, $200, and a promise to do any medical work Betty or her family needed, no charge. A prospect named Jax, 23, covered in tattoos and better with computers than anyone twice his age, raised his hand. "We go viral. I set up a crowdfund page. Tell the story. People love this kind of thing. Underdog, working class, bikers helping someone. It writes itself." "Can you make it clean?" Ledger asked. "Transparent. Every dollar accounted for. Because the second someone thinks we're scamming, it falls apart." "I can do that." Hawk pulled out his phone, opened the encrypted app the clubs used for communication, started typing. The message went to 47 chapters across Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland. Clubs they'd ridden with, clubs that owed them favors, clubs that didn't owe them anything but shared the same code. It read, "16 years ago, a diner waitress helped me become the father my daughter needed. Yesterday, her boss fired her for showing the same kindness to one of ours. We're buying her the building. Ride starts Saturday, 6 a.m. Who's in?" He hit send. The responses started immediately. 42 confirmed within 10 minutes, 97 within the hour. By midnight, 214. Across the state, in clubhouses and garages and living rooms, men and women were reading the message. Some remembered Hawk. Some remembered their own moments when a stranger had shown them kindness they didn't deserve. Some just believed in the principle. One by one, they started their engines. In Clearfield, the Iron Covenant members divided the work. Stitch called a lawyer he knew, civil rights attorney named Margaret Chen, explained the situation. She agreed to take it pro bono, said she'd have contracts ready by the weekend. Jax set up the crowdfunding page, posted the security footage, wrote the story in plain language, no dramatics, just facts. Within 2 hours, it had 5,000 views. By morning, 50,000. Ledger created an escrow account. Every donation would go there, visible to anyone who wanted to see. No hidden fees, no administrative costs, just transparency. Preacher made coffee, stayed up through the night with the others, coordinating. At 3 in the morning, he said, "You know, this might not work." Hawk looked up from his phone. "I know. And if it does work, she's still gotta run the place. That's not easy. I know that too. So why?" Hawk thought about it. "Because 16 years ago, someone saw me at my worst and decided I was worth the effort. I've got a daughter who loves me because of that. How do you not pay that back?" Preacher nodded, poured more coffee. By Friday afternoon, the count was at 1,847 confirmed riders. Clubs from as far as Pittsburgh and Harrisburg, veteran groups, independent writers who'd seen the story and wanted to be part of it. The crowdfunding page had raised $42,000. It still wasn't enough to buy the building, but it was a start. Friday night, Hawk drove to Betty's house. Small rental on the east side of town. Peeling paint, chain-link fence. Her car was in the driveway, the same Honda from 16 years ago. He knocked. She answered, and he could see the exhaustion on her face. 4 days without work, without income. "Hawk," she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Heard what happened. Wanted to check in." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be fine. Always land on my feet." He handed her a bag of groceries. Nothing fancy. Bread, milk, eggs, coffee. just in case. She took it, and for a moment she looked like she might cry, but she didn't. You didn't have to do this. I know. As he walked back to his bike, he looked back once. Her kitchen light was the only one on the street. He pulled out his phone, sent one more message to the network. Tomorrow, we ride. Wheels up at dawn. Let's show them what good people look like. By sunrise, 2,000 motorcycles would be rolling toward Clearfield, Pennsylvania. And Betty Morgan had no idea her life was about to change. If stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the system won't share them, but we will. This is what happens when ordinary people decide enough is enough. Saturday morning broke cold and clear, 5:43, and the sun was just starting to edge over the hills east of Pittsburgh. At the Fort Pitt Bridge, 340 motorcycles sat idling, their riders checking fuel and tightening straps and waiting for the signal. Hawk stood at the front, raised his hand, dropped it. The sound was like thunder rolling uphill. They moved in formation, 2 lanes wide, engines synchronized into a rhythm that you felt in your chest before you heard it. Cars pulled to the shoulder. People came out of houses to watch. A child on an overpass waved an American flag, and every rider who passed gave a salute. In Harrisburg, 290 bikes joined them at the state capitol steps. A police escort had been arranged, negotiated ahead through official channels. The troopers looked at the sea of leather and chrome and radioed ahead to clear the route. In Morgantown, 180 more. Veterans clubs riding with flags at half-mast. Men and women who'd served and come home to find the country had moved on without them. They understood what it meant when someone remembered. Along Route 80, smaller groups joined at every exit. 2 bikes here, a dozen there. By the time they reached the Clearfield County line, the procession stretched for 3 miles. A gas station attendant stood outside, watching them pass. When Reaper pulled in to refill, the attendant's hands were shaking. "Is something happening?" he asked. "Is there trouble?" Reaper smiled, slow and easy. "Something good. You'll see." At a rest stop, a state trooper approached Preacher. "You guys got permits for a rally this size?" Preacher handed over the paperwork. All filed, all legal. Peaceful assembly, charitable cause, liaisons identified. The trooper looked at the documents, then at the endless line of motorcycles filling the parking lot. "My mom was a waitress," he said. 30 years, broke her back for tips. He handed the papers back. "What you're doing? Respect." By 9:17, they reached Clearfield. 2,000 motorcycles filled every street, every parking lot, every field within half a mile of Route 9 diner. The sound was sustained thunder, and it didn't stop. People came out of their houses. Store owners stood in doorways. The local elementary school, 2 blocks away, had kids pressed against the windows. Inside the diner, Derek Vaughn stood frozen behind the counter. 3 customers sat at tables staring out the window, coffee going cold in their hands. Chief Martinez was already outside, arms crossed, waiting. He'd been expecting this. The permits had crossed his desk 2 days ago. Hawk dismounted, walked toward the diner alone, hands visible, movement slow and deliberate. The other rider stayed back. Derek watched him approach, tried to square his shoulders, but his hands were gripping the counter edge. The bell above the door chimed when Hawk entered. "You can't be in here," Derek said, voice tight. "I'll call the police." "Chief's outside. We filed all the permits. We're on public property." Hawk stopped 3 feet from the counter, non-threatening, calm. "We're not here to scare you." "Then what the hell is this?" "A business proposition. We want to buy this building." Derek laughed, high-pitched, nervous. "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale. We're offering $375,000, cash, 30-day close." The laughter stopped. Derek's eyes narrowed, greed and suspicion fighting each other. Why? Because Betty Morgan worked here 34 years, and you threw her out for showing basic human decency. We're correcting that. Derek's face hardened. I don't care if you've got $1 million. I'm not selling to some biker gang so you can make a point. He pulled out his phone. I've already called my lawyer. This is harassment, intimidation. Hawk didn't move. We're not intimidating anyone. We're customers. He turned to the door, nodded. The diner filled with bikers, not rushing, not loud, just walking in, taking seats, picking up menus. Within 5 minutes, every booth and stool was occupied. Coffee, please, someone said. I'll take the pancakes. Eggs over easy, bacon, wheat toast. Derek stared, realized the trap he was in. If he refused service, it was discrimination. If he served them, he legitimized their presence. He had no choice. He started taking orders. Hands shaking, sweat beading on his forehead, the register kept ringing. Each ticket came with cash, exact change, and tips that were absurd. $50 on a $6 check, $80 on a $12 breakfast. Outside, a news van pulled up, WPCB Channel 7. Reporter Amanda Cortez climbed out, camera crew behind her. Jax intercepted her, gave her the full story, showed her the crowdfunding page, now at $68,000 and climbing. By 10 a.m., the hashtag #RideForBetty was trending locally. Inside, Derek made a call, put it on speaker without realizing how many people could hear. Corporate, this is Derek Vaughn, Clearfield location. I've got a situation. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional. What kind of situation? There's about 2,000 bikers outside. They're trying to buy my building. Pause. Why? I fired an employee. They're trying to make some kind of statement. You fired an employee and now you're on the news? Derek's face went pale. How did you... It's trending on Twitter, Derek. You fired a woman with 34 years of service for giving away food? She violated policy. You're a franchisee. You just made us look like villains on social media. Fix this or we pull your contract. The line went dead. Derek stood there, phone in hand, surrounded by bikers calmly eating breakfast. Hawk stepped outside. Flint was waiting with Betty. She'd been picked up from her house 20 minutes ago, told there was something she needed to see. When she came around the corner and saw the motorcycles, the signs that said "Ride for Betty," the news cameras, she stopped walking. What did you do? Her voice barely a whisper. What you did for me. We're circling back. She was crying now, hands over her mouth. Derek burst out of the diner. You think you've won? I'll burn this place down before I sell it to you. Chief Martinez stepped forward, hand resting on his belt. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Vaughn. Want to repeat that for my body camera? Derek looked around. Cameras everywhere. 2,000 witnesses. He turned and walked back inside. Hawk looked at Betty. This isn't over, but we are not going anywhere. Betty nodded, couldn't speak, just stood there while 2,000 engines idled, waiting. Margaret Chen's office sat above a bail bondsman on 3rd Street, the kind of place where the carpet was worn thin and the coffee was always burnt. But the law degree on the wall was real, and so was her reputation. Sunday morning, and she was already at her desk when Hawk, Preacher, and Ledger arrived. She was 42, sharp-eyed, with reading glasses perched on her head and a yellow legal pad covered in notes. Derek Vaughn can refuse to sell, she said without preamble, private property rights. But he's exposed in other ways. She slid a stack of documents across the desk. County records, business filings, court dockets. This is his 3rd franchise. The first 2 he was forced to sell after labor disputes, wrongful termination suits. He settles quietly, signs non-disclosures, moves on. Ledger leaned forward. Pattern of behavior, but nothing criminal? He's careful, stays just below the threshold. Until now. Margaret tapped her pen against the pad. We need to document everything. Former employees, financial irregularities, anything that puts pressure on him or the corporation. They divided the work. Stitch took employee outreach. He had a way of talking to people, calm and unhurried, that made them trust him. By Sunday evening, he'd contacted 11 former employees across 3 locations. Maria Gonzalez, fired in 2019. He said I stole a bagel. I gave it to my daughter. She came by after school, and we were throwing out the day-olds anyway. He called me a thief in front of customers. Trevor Washington, fired in 2021. Customer complained I was too friendly. Derek said I made people uncomfortable. The customer was wearing a hat with a Confederate flag. I'm black. You tell me what that was about. Sandra Kim, fired in 2022. I had a miscarriage, asked for 2 days off. He said if I wasn't back the next morning, don't bother coming back. Each interview was recorded with permission. Each one added weight. Ledger went after the financial records, public filings, tax documents, employee pay stubs that people had kept. He found the discrepancy on the second day. Tips were being pooled, which was legal, but administrative fees were being deducted before distribution. 15% off the top, labeled as processing costs. Pennsylvania law was clear. Tips belong on to employees, all of them. Ledger ran the numbers. $47,000 over 3 years, skimmed across 3 locations. Jax handled the digital front. He crowdsourced former customers on social media, asking for health and safety concerns. The responses came fast. Food poisoning, 3 separate incidents. Rodent sightings, expired milk used in coffee. One photograph showed a date stamp 2 weeks past expiration on a carton of cream. Jax tagged the county health department in every post. By Monday morning, an inspector was scheduled for a surprise visit. Sunday evening, Hawk and Preacher sat with Betty in her kitchen. Margaret was there too, taking notes. The house was small. 2 bedrooms, linoleum floors, a table with mismatched chairs. Pictures on the walls. Betty's late husband in uniform, a young man with kind eyes and a condition that made his hand shake. That's Michael, Betty said. My son, he's 38. Where is he? Preacher asked gently. Sleeping. He has Parkinson's. Early onset, diagnosed 8 years ago. The room went quiet. Medical bills are $3,200 a month after insurance. I've been working doubles to cover it. Derek knew. I asked for schedule flexibility a dozen times. He always said no. Margaret wrote something down. Did he give a reason? Said the business couldn't accommodate special treatment. Hawk leaned back in his chair. How long can you keep this up? Betty looked at her hands. I can't. I got an eviction notice last week. 3 months behind on rent. She stood, opened a drawer, pulled out an envelope. The notice was official, stamped, dated. I didn't tell Michael. What's the point? He's already going to have to move in with his cousin in Ohio. And She stopped. Going to what? Preacher's voice was soft. My husband had a life insurance policy. If something happened to me, if it looked accidental, Michael would be covered. I had it planned out. Silence filled the kitchen like a weight. Hawk stood, walked to the window, looked out at the dark street. You're not doing that, he said. You hear me? We've got you. Monday morning, the health inspector arrived at the diner unannounced. Derek was there, trying to restock after the weekend chaos. He saw the county vehicle pull up and his face went pale. The inspection took 2 hours. Expired dairy products 2 weeks past date. Refrigeration unit running 10 degrees too warm. Rodent droppings in the dry storage area. Grease trap not cleaned in violation of code. The inspector documented everything. At the end, he handed Derek a clipboard. You're shut down for a minimum of 72 hours pending remediation. If you reopen before clearance, that's a $50,000 fine and potential criminal charges. Derek took the clipboard. His hands were shaking. This is because of those bikers. They're harassing me. Sir, I'm responding to public complaints and conducting a standard inspection. The violations are real. I can make this go away. Derek's voice dropped. 500 cash, we call it a day. The inspector's expression didn't change. Mr. Vaughn, you just attempted to bribe a state official. I'm required to report this. Derek realized too late. The inspector's body camera had been recording the entire time. By Monday afternoon, Jax's video counter read 2.3 million views. National outlets picked it up. CNN ran a segment. The crowdfunding page hit $127,000. But the building purchase was still short. The corporation wanted $575,000, and they had $216 committed between the club funds and donations. Tuesday morning, Margaret got a call from corporate headquarters. They were terminating Derek's franchise agreement immediately. Breach of contract, morality clause, brand damage. The building would revert to corporate ownership. Margaret called Hawk. They're willing to sell, But the price went up, $5.75. They want market rate plus damages. We don't have that. I know, but they're not budging. They're protecting their image, not doing anyone favors. Hawk stood in front of the assembled club members that night. 1,200 bikers were still camped in the fields outside town, rotating shifts, refusing to leave. They moved the goalpost, he said. We need another 400,000. I won't ask anyone to go into debt for this. Preacher stood. Then we stay. We fill that diner every single day when they reopen, make it impossible for them to operate until they negotiate. Reaper nodded. We've got time. They've got shareholders. The vote was unanimous. Hawk looked out at the sea. All right, this is a siege now. We dig in. Outside, the engines kept running. By Thursday, the encampment had become a small city. Tents lined the field adjacent to the diner, organized in neat rows with paths between them. Portable generators hummed, camp stoves hissed, American flags hung from makeshift poles. 3 shifts rotated every 8 hours, ensuring constant presence. A sign went up at the field entrance, hand-painted on plywood. We stay until Betty owns this building. The farmer who owned the land, a man named Earl Hutchins, had given permission on day 1. Now he was out there every morning with thermoses of coffee, refusing payment, telling anyone who'd listen that his own mother had been a waitress and he knew what it meant to work for nothing. Local businesses started contributing. Pearl's Bakery, directly across from the diner, sent fresh donuts every dawn. Pearl Washington was 73, had owned the shop for 40 years, and her hands shook when she handed Hawk the first box. My daughter worked for Derek once, she said, lasted 2 weeks, came home crying because he screamed at her for smiling too much at customers, said it wasn't professional. She pressed the box into Hawk's hands. You keep doing what you're doing. Clearfield High School students organized a car wash, raised $4,200 in a single Saturday, brought the check to the encampment themselves, a cluster of 16-year-olds in school shirts, nervous and proud. The local Methodist church opened its bathrooms and showers to the bikers. Pastor Michaels stood at the door on Sunday morning and invited them to service. Half attended. Filled the back 3 pews, quiet and respectful, and when the collection plate came around, they filled it with 20s and 50s. But not everyone was supportive. Mayor Richard Hancock called a meeting on day 5, requested Hawk's presence at Town Hall. The room was paneled in dark wood, smelled like old paper and floor wax. The mayor sat behind a heavy desk, fingers steepled. You're scaring people, he said. Hawk stayed standing. Who? Name one person we've threatened. It's the optics. 2,000 bikers camped outside a small-town diner. People are worried. About what? We've been here almost a week. How many incidents have been reported? The mayor shifted. None, but the perception is that 2,000 people are standing up for a working woman who got thrown away. If that scares someone, that's their problem. The mayor tried a different angle. This is hurting local business. Pearl's Bakery is up 30%. The hardware store sold out of generators and camping supplies. The grocery is restocking twice as fast. We're putting money into this town. Hancock had no response to that. Derek Vaughn was unraveling. His Facebook page became a stream of angry posts, calling the bikers thugs and criminals, sharing old mugshots of members he dug up online. Hawk's assault conviction from 16 years ago. Ledger's embezzlement charge. Stitch's dishonorable discharge. Margaret filed a defamation suit within hours. Friday morning, day 5, a black SUV pulled up to the diner. Tinted windows, corporate plates. 4 men got out, ex-cops in tactical gear, private security. Then a man in a suit, 50s, silver hair, expensive watch. Richard Brennan, vice president of operations for the franchise corporation. He walked past the bikers without looking at them, went inside the closed diner, came back out and made a phone call. An hour later, Hawk, Preacher, and Margaret were summoned to a meeting at the bank conference room downtown. Brennan sat at the head of the table, security standing behind him. He didn't stand when they entered. This has been a fascinating publicity stunt, he said. But let's be adults. You don't have the capital. We're not selling at a loss. Pack up and let us handle our business. Margaret set her briefcase on the table. Your business includes enabling labor violations and wage theft. Alleged. Derek Vaughn is no longer affiliated with us. As far as we're concerned, this is resolved. Hawk leaned forward. Betty doesn't have her building. Ms. Morgan can apply for employment when we reopen. I'm sure we can find a position for her. Preacher's voice was quiet. You mean she can beg for her job back? Brennan's expression hardened. I mean, we're offering grace, but if you continue this occupation, we'll pursue legal action. Harassment, tortious interference. We have resources you can't match. Ledger smiled. We have 2.3 million people watching. Try it. As they left the building, Brennan spoke to his security team, loud enough to be overheard, intentional, or
Arliss. Give them till Monday. If they're still there, we call in favors. State police can clear them out. Jax was recording from the hallway. The audio was online within 15 minutes. Corporate issued an immediate denial, but the damage was done. Saturday morning, day 6, the crowdfunding page exploded. An anonymous donor contributed $100,000. The attached message read, "My Aunt Pearl worked 40 years as a domestic worker, never complained. These bikers are fighting for every Pearl who gets overlooked. This is for them." Within 6 hours, the total reached $287,000. Still short of the $575,000 needed, but the momentum was undeniable. Saturday night, Derek made his final mistake. He'd been drinking, drove to the encampment just after 10, parked his truck at an angle, got out stumbling, started shouting, "You ruined my life! I'm bankrupt! My wife left me! This is your fault!" The bikers didn't react, stayed calm, watched. Derek got louder. "I should have called the cops the first time one of you trash walked in." He threw a beer bottle. It shattered near a tent, glass spraying across the grass. No one was hurt, but it didn't matter. Chief Martinez had been monitoring from his patrol car. He was out and moving before the bottle landed. "Mr. Vaughn, turn around. Hands behind your back." Derek spun. "They're the ones!" Public intoxication. Assault. You're under arrest. As Martinez cuffed him, Derek kept screaming, "She's just a waitress! She doesn't matter!" 40 phones recorded it. The video was viral by midnight. Sunday morning, the clip had 8.9 million views. National news ran it on loop. The image of Derek being led away in handcuffs, still shouting about how Betty didn't matter, became the story. Public outrage was immediate and overwhelming. The crowdfunding page hit $628,000 by noon. Corporate stock price dropped 4%. Social media was flooded with boycott threats. At 3 p.m., Brennan called Margaret directly. "Will sell. $340,000. Original appraisal. Cash close 15 days. Margaret kept her voice level. "Why the change?" "Your people made us the villain. Our marketing department says we're losing entire demographics. The board wants this over." Betty gets the building. Full ownership, clean title. Done. But we want a photo opportunity. Her shaking hands with our representative, community investment angle. Not a chance. You sell clean. You don't get to rehabilitate your image on her back. Long pause. Fine. Contracts by Tuesday. Margaret ended the call, looked at Hawk and Preacher. We got it. That evening, Hawk walked to Betty's rental house, knocked on the door. She answered, exhausted, eyes red from crying or lack of sleep, or both. "Get dressed," he said. "We need you to sign some papers." "What papers?" He smiled. First time in a week. "The deed. You own the diner, Betty. It's yours." Her knees gave out. Hawk caught her before she hit the ground, held her while she sobbed into his shoulder. Outside, 2,000 engines rumbled in the distance. The siege was over. Tuesday morning arrived cold and bright. Margaret Chen's office at 10 o'clock. The space crowded with people and paperwork. Betty sat at the conference table, Hawk and Preacher on either side, Ledger standing near the window. Across from them, the corporate attorney, James Feldman, mid-50s, suit pressed sharp, expression carefully neutral. The escrow agent laid out the documents. Deed transfer, title insurance, closing statement. A cashier's check for $340,000 sat in the center of the table like a promise made physical. Betty's hand shook as she reached for the pen. Feldman slid the first document toward her. Ms. Morgan, you understand this property requires immediate health code remediation before reopening. Estimated cost between $25,000 and $40,000. You'll also need business licenses, liability insurance, updated permits. He was trying to overwhelm her, make the victory feel like a burden. Margaret cut in. All arranged. Ms. Morgan has a contractor and management team lined up. Betty looked at her, surprised. This was the first she was hearing about any team. Ledger spoke from the window. We've got it covered. Betty signed. Each page felt heavier than the last. Her name in cursive, the same signature she'd used on time cards for 34 years, now signing ownership papers. When the last page was done, Feldman gathered the documents into his briefcase, stood to leave, paused at the door. Off the record, he looked directly at Betty. I hope you or fail. People like you don't know how to run businesses. You'll be bankrupt in 6 months, and we'll buy it back for pennies. He walked out. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Betty looked down at her hands. Is he right? Hawk turned his chair toward her. No, but we need to talk about what comes next. An hour later, they stood inside the diner, Betty's first time entering as the owner. The building had been closed for 11 days, and Derek had made sure to leave his mark. The fryer was smashed, grease congealed across the floor. The dishwasher had been ripped from its moorings, water damage spreading across the tile. 2 coolers stood open, spoiled food rotting inside. Graffiti covered the bathroom walls in black spray paint. The words were crude, angry, biker trash, thieves, worse things. Betty walked through slowly, taking it in. 34 years of memories, now hers to save or destroy. She sat in the booth where she'd served Flint that first morning, the cracked vinyl familiar under her hands. I don't know how to do this. Her voice was small. I'm a waitress. I've never managed anything. Preacher slid into the seat across from her. You managed to raise a son with Parkinson's on a server's wage. You managed to show kindness when it cost you everything. You'll manage this. What if I can't? Then you'll learn, same as everyone else. That night, Betty sat at her kitchen table with Michael. He was 38, but looked older, the tremor in his hands more pronounced when he was tired. She told him everything, the firing, the bikers, the building, the debt still hanging over them. Michael listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, You should sell it. Take the money. You've earned rest. Your father used to say something. Betty looked at the photo on the wall, her husband in desert camouflage. The only thing you really own is what you do with your hands. I've served people my whole life. Maybe now I serve them in a place that's actually mine. What if you fail? Then I fail as an owner, not an employee. She smiled, tired but certain. I'll take that. Wednesday morning, the work began. Contractors arrived, most of them bikers with trade skills, volunteering labor. Stitch rewired the kitchen, his medic's hands steady with electrical work. Jax installed a new point-of-sale system, equipment donated by a local tech company that had seen the story. Pearl Washington organized a cleaning crew, showed up with industrial supplies and a determination that brooked no argument. By Thursday, the diner was starting to look like itself again. Then the lawsuit arrived. Derek Vaughn, represented by a lawyer whose hourly rate suggested desperation rather than confidence, filed suit against Betty, Hawk, Margaret, and the Iron Covenant MC. The charges, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, tortious interference with business relationships. He was seeking $2.3 million in damages. If he won, he could seize the diner. Margaret called an emergency meeting that afternoon. Betty, Hawk, Preacher, and Ledger crammed into her office. This is a slap suit, Margaret explained. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's meant to drain resources and silence you through legal costs. How much are we talking? Betty asked. Discovery alone could take months. Trial prep, depositions, expert witnesses. Legal fees could hit $80,000 or more. Betty stood, walked to the window below, looked out at the street below. Then we fight it." Margaret nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that." Discovery moved fast. Margaret subpoenaed Derek's employment records from all 3 franchise locations, called in former employees for depositions. Maria Gonzalez testified about being called a thief. Trevor Washington described the racial discrimination. Sandra Kim recounted being fired after her miscarriage. Margaret obtained financial records showing the wage theft, health department reports documenting violations, Derek's own social media posts, archived and timestamped, showing him initiating attacks on the bikers. The deposition took place 2 weeks later in a bland conference room that smelled like recycled air and fear. Derek sat across from Margaret, his lawyer beside him, looking increasingly uncomfortable. A court reporter's fingers moved silently across the stenography machine. Margaret was methodical. "Mr. Vaughn, you testified under oath that you maintained a spotless employment record. Is that accurate?" "Yes." She slid a stack of documents across the table. "These are 3 wrongful termination settlements you personally signed. Combined payout of $127,000. You call that
Spotless? Derek's lawyer leaned forward. Those were nuisance settlements to avoid litigation. I'm asking Mr. Vaughn. Margaret didn't look away from Derek. You also testified that the bikers' campaign against you was unprovoked harassment. Is that accurate? Yes, they came after me because... Margaret pressed play on a small recorder. Derek's voice filled the room, slurred and vicious from that night at the encampment. She's just a waitress. She doesn't matter. Does that sound like a man unjustly attacked, or a man revealing his character? The recess was called 15 minutes later. In the hallway, voices carried through the thin walls. Derek's lawyer, frustrated and cornered, "You lied to me about the settlements, about the health violations. I can't defend this." "So what do I do?" "Drop the suit today before she countersues and takes whatever you have left." When they returned, Derek's lawyer addressed the room without looking at anyone. "My client wishes to withdraw his complaint, with prejudice." Margaret leaned back. "Ms. Morgan wants a public statement, admitting you fired her without cause." Derek's face was pale. "No." "Then we proceed, and I file counterclaims for wage theft, defamation, and fraud. I will personally ensure you never work in food service again." The silence stretched. "What do you want me to say?" Betty spoke for the first time since entering the room. "That you were wrong. That I did nothing wrong. And that you're sorry." The statement was recorded an hour later. Derek read from a script, his voice flat and mechanical. No emotion, no sincerity. Just words that would be posted online and archived forever. Outside the building, news cameras waited. A reporter pushed forward. "Ms. Morgan, how does it feel to win?" Betty stopped, looked at the camera. "I didn't win. I just didn't lose. There's a difference." As they walked away, Hawk said quietly to Preacher, "She's going to be just fine." 3 months later, February arrived, with snow that turned to slush by mid-morning. Betty Morgan stood outside her diner at 5:30 a.m., keys in hand, breath forming clouds in the cold air. Above the door, a new sign caught the streetlight, "Betty's Place, ST 2024. Beneath it, smaller letters, "Where kindness is always on the menu." She unlocked the door for the first time as owner and stepped inside. The interior had been transformed. Fresh paint in pale yellow warmed the walls. The booths had been refurbished, old vinyl patched and re-dyed because Betty insisted on keeping them. New equipment hummed in the kitchen, some donated, some bought at cost by suppliers who'd followed the story. Along one wall hung photographs, staff through the decades, her late husband in uniform, bikers who'd helped rebuild. The staff arrived at 5:45. Maria Gonzalez, now assistant manager, the woman Derek had called a thief over a bagel. Trevor Washington, head cook, moving through the kitchen with the confidence of someone finally respected. Sandra Kim on the morning shift, the woman who'd lost a pregnancy and then her job in the same week. 3 others joined them, single parents, people rebuilding after hardship. The break room held a handwritten policy taped to the wall. "No one goes hungry here. Not staff, not customers. We figure it out." At 6 o'clock, Betty unlocked the front door. The line outside stretched 200 people deep, standing in February cold, waiting. At the front stood Hawk, Flint, Preacher, and Reaper.
News crews had set up across the street, local and national both, cameras trained on the entrance. Betty opened the door, looked at the crowd. "Y'all gonna make me cry before I even pour coffee." Hawk entered first, sat in the same booth where Flint had counted change 3 months ago, ordered the breakfast special, $12.50, left $200 on the table with a receipt that said, "Good people always circle back." The first week was chaos. Half the customers came out of curiosity, half out of genuine support. The diner stayed packed from opening until close. Betty worked the floor, but she was also learning to manage, sitting with Ledger twice a week to understand the books, the payroll, the inventory. Michael, her son, stationed himself at the register. The tremor in his hands was manageable with medication now, and the job gave him something his disability had taken away: purpose. Bikers still stopped in, but not as spectacle. They'd become regulars, knew their orders, left tips that kept the staff smiling. By the end of the first month, Clearfield had seen a 34% increase in visitors. People wanted to eat at that diner from the story. The hardware store, the grocery, Pearl's Bakery, all reported higher sales. The economic ripple reached every corner of the small town. Mayor Hancock, who'd asked the bikers to leave, issued a formal commendation to the Iron Covenant MC, invited them to a public ceremony. Hawk declined. "We didn't do it for recognition." The building had a second floor, unused for years. Betty converted it into a modest 2-bedroom apartment. She and Michael moved in. No landlord, no rent. Every morning at 5, Betty descended the stairs, started the coffee, and Michael joined her at 6. Small changes marked the new life. Michael's medication cabinet stayed fully stocked now. Betty's arthritic hams still ached, but she soaked them in warm water each night with a smile on her face. A photo of her late husband sat on the kitchen counter beside a picture of her and Hawk at the reopening. One evening, Betty sat in a community college classroom, enrolled in small business management. A 19-year-old girl next to her sighed in frustration. "I don't know why I'm even doing this. I'm just a waitress. I'll never own anything." Betty set down her pen. "I was just a waitress for 34 years. Now I own the building. Don't let anyone tell you what you're just." The girl stared. Recognition dawned. "Wait, you're that woman from the news." "I'm someone who got help when I needed it. Now I'm learning how to do this right." Sunday mornings at First Methodist Church saw 23 bikers in regular attendance, Hawk and Preacher among them. Pastor Michaels referenced them in a sermon one week. 3 months ago, some feared when motorcycles filled our streets. Today, those same men rebuilt Mrs. Patterson's wheelchair ramp and tutor struggling students at the high school. We learned that family takes many forms. Hawk whispered to Preacher, "We're never living this down." "Good, means we mattered." Derek Vaughn moved to Ohio, took a job as regional manager for a budget motel chain. No contact with anyone from Clearfield. His lawsuit withdrawal had gone viral, turned him into a symbol of bosses getting what they deserved. There was no redemption for him in this story. Some people don't change, and the story was never about him anyway. 6 months after the reopening, late evening, the diner was winding down. The last customer left at 9. Betty wiped down the counters, a task she still did herself. Flint walked in. "We closed?" "For you, never." She poured coffee, slid over a piece of apple pie. He sat at the counter. "I never thanked you properly," he said. "For what?" "That morning. You gave me more than breakfast. You gave me dignity. I was counting change like I was nothing, and you didn't make me feel small." Betty set down her dish rag. "Sweetheart, I've been counting change my whole life. There's no shame in it." The door opened. Emma, Hawk's daughter, 17 now, arrived for her evening shift. Part-time work after school. She called Betty Aunt Betty, and the name had stuck. 3 generations of connection visible in one room. Hawk, helped 16 years ago. Emma, who existed in her father's life because of that help. Betty, who now gave Emma her first job. The circle was complete. Betty Morgan never set out to be a symbol. She just wanted to feed someone who was hungry. She didn't know 1 plate of eggs would become 2,000 motorcycles, or that getting fired would lead to ownership. But that's the thing about kindness. It doesn't calculate returns. It just circles back. Derek Vaughn saw a waitress. The bikers saw someone who changed a life. The difference? One saw a transaction. The other saw a human being. Today, Betty's Place serves about 300 people daily. The breakfast special still costs $12.50. And if someone's short on cash, Betty slides them a plate anyway. Some lessons once learned never leave. The Iron Covenant still rides through Clearfield, but now they're not strangers. They're family. Every Sunday morning, Hawk sits in that corner booth, leaves a tip that's too big, and a note that says the same thing. Good people always circle back. Betty keeps every note, 87 of them now, in a wooden box behind the register. She says when she's too old to work, she'll pass the box to whoever takes over, so they remember what this place really is. Not just a diner, a promise kept. The camera pulls back from the window, warm light spilling onto the dark street. A single motorcycle parked outside. The engine silent now. The work done. This story is based on real events. Betty's place remains open in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. The Iron Covenant continues supporting communities across the Mid-Atlantic. Sometimes the heroes don't wear capes. They wear leather, and they keep their promises.